In this section, we will learn the knowledge of speech production, which is very important in speech coding and speech synthesis. The computer can generate the voice like human being. How does human being produce the voice? We can know this by observing human vocal apparatus. The figure shows mid-sagittal plane from X-ring of human vocal apparatus. The part inside the dotted lines show vocal tract begins at the glottis, the vocal cords, and ends at the lips. It consists of the pharynx, the connection from the esophagus to the mouth, and the mouth itself, the oral cavity. The average length of male vocal tract system is 17.5 cm. The length of vocal tract will affect the formant frequency. The cross-sectional area determined by positions of the tongue, lips, jaw, and velum varies from 0 complete closure to 20 square centimeter. Another one relative to speech production is nasal tract, which begins at the velum and ends at the nostrils. Velum has a trapdoor-like mechanism at the back of the mouth cavity. It lures to couple the nasal tract to the vocal tract to produce the nasal sounds like mum, night, sing. Professor Sherry Narayan in University of Southern California investigate the speech production through 2D real-time MRI of vocal tract. We can clearly observe the human vocal apparatus and the speech generation path from the figures. From the schematic view of vocal tract, we can know some mechanism of speech production. As is shown in the acoustic tube model's demo, generally, air enters the lungs where normal breathing and no speech is produced on intake. As air is expelled from the lungs, where the trachea or windpipe, the tensed vocal cords within the larynx are caused to vibrate by the airflow. Air is chopped up into quasi-periodic pulses, which are modulated in frequency or spectral-shaped, in passing through the pharynx, which is the throat cavity, the mouth cavity, and possibly the nasal cavity. The positions of the various articulators, jaw, tongue, velum, lips, mouth, determine the sound that is produced. The vocal cords or folds form a relaxation oscillator. Air pressure builds up and blows them apart. Air flows through the orifice and pressure drops, allowing the vocal cords to close. Then the cycle is repeated. Here is a video to show how vocal cords work and generate songs.
It all begins with the vocal cords. Specialists look at your vocal cords with a flexible or a rigid scope. The flexible scope is a small cord with a camera at the end of it. It's inserted through the nose and extended down the throat to see the vocal cords. The rigid scope is like a large pen with a camera at the end. It's used looking into the mouth and throat. Both images look like this. This can be confusing because the vocal cords are horizontal in the throat, like this. They are not vertical, like this. When the scope sees the cords and projects it on a monitor, they look like they're vertical or up and down. Vocal cords, sometimes called vocal folds, are located in the mid-portion of your neck, about halfway down, between the top and the bottom of your neck. There are two vocal cords, and they're They're connected in the front of your neck and open and close in the back, towards the back of your neck. They're located inside the voice box or larynx. The cords sit at the top of your windpipe or trachea. Men can feel the top of their voice box, often called the Adam's apple. Women have the same thing, but it's smaller and harder to feel with your finger. Your vocal cords are just behind the Adam's apple. Now, women can sometimes feel their Adam's apple by placing their finger here and gently pushing in on their neck. And about the first lump that you feel is the top of the larynx. About halfway down your neck, you can feel that small bump. That's your Adam's apple, ladies. And your vocal cords are just behind it. I can feel a small V right in the center of the top of my Adam's apple. That's the cartilage. Now, at birth, our vocal cords are about the same length, approximately 2 millimeters. By age 20, women's cords are about 10 millimeters and men's 16 millimeters in length. The change for men is much greater, and this causes a deepening of the voice and can make singing during the vocal change much harder. Vocal cords are tissue and are three-dimensional. That means they have length, width, and depth. Just like other tissue in your body, there are different layers of tissue. Vocal cords have 3 primary layers: muscle, ligament, and mucosa. It's the slick outer layer of the vocal cord. The vocal cords open when we breathe and come together when we make noise with our voices, and are covered up when we swallow. A type of lid called the epiglottis closes over the vocal cords when we swallow. Sometimes fluid gets through and we cough to clear it out. When air passes through our vocal cords as we speak or sing, they create a series of sound waves, which we can hear. This series of sound waves we call vibration. The vocal cords create the initial vibrations, which is the initial tones we hear that begin the sound we make when speaking and singing. Now watch and listen as these vocal cords create the vibrations that become our voices.
The figures show the results of glottal flow of the first 30 milliseconds of voice sound. The upper one is the glottal volume velocity. The lower one is the resulting sound pressure at the mouth. We can see that there is a 15 millisecond build-up to periodicity. The pitch detection issues at the beginning and end of the voicing. Also, there is voiced and unvoiced uncertainty for 50 milliseconds. This figure shows schematic representation or physiological mechanism of speech production. Human lines and associated muscles act as the source of air for exciting the vocal mechanism. Muscle force pushes air out of the lungs, like a piston pushing air up within a cylinder, through bronchi and trachea. If vocal cords are tensed, airflow causes them to vibrate, producing voiced or quasi-periodic speech sounds, like music notes. If vocal cords are relaxed, airflow continues through vocal tract until it hits a constriction in the tract, causing it to become turbulent, thereby producing unvoiced sounds like s, sh, or it hits a point of total closure in the vocal tract, building up pressure until the closure is opened and the pressure is suddenly and abruptly released, causing a brief transit sound, like at the beginning of p, t, or k. Speech production model can be regarded as source plus channel. From the view of discrete time model, speech production can be regarded as excitation plus system. The speech production can be described with physical model as is shown in the figure. From the view of signal processing, the speech can be produced by an excitation passing through a time-varying filter. The excitation generally has three types, corresponding to the voiced, unvoiced, mixed speech source. The vocal tract and the nasal tract make different types of filters. Source filter-based systems use an abstract model of the speech production system. Speech production is modeled as an excitation source that is passed through a linear digital filter. The excitation source represents either voiced or unvoiced speech, and the filter models the effect produced by the vocal tract on the signal. The sound source for voiced sounds can be modeled as a volume velocity source at glottis. The glottis is the part of the larynx consisting of the vocal cords and the opening between them. It affects voice modulation through expansion and contraction. Thus, the pitch cycle or fundamental frequency is generated in the voiced sound. The sound source for voiced sounds can be modeled as series pressure source at constriction. The pressure at each frequency point is relative to velocity at constriction and the critical dimension. Turbulence noise is produced at a constriction in the vocal tract. Aspiration noise like t, p is produced in the vicinity of the glottis. Frication noise is like sh, ch. It's produced above the glottis. Human vocal tract is essentially a tube of varying cross-sectional area, or can be approximated as a concatenation of tubes of varying cross-sectional areas. Acoustic theory shows that the transfer function of energy from the excitation source to the output can be described in terms of the natural frequencies or resonances of the tube. Resonances known as formants or formant frequencies for speech, and they represent the frequencies that pass the most acoustic energy from the source to the output. Typically, there are three significant formants below about 3,500 Hz. Formants are a highly efficient, compact representation of speech. Concatenation of 5 lossless acoustic tubes is shown in the figure. We can approximate the vocal tract area function AX by a series of lossless constant cross-sectional area. As the number of tubes becomes larger, that's to say, there is smaller approximation error for the vocal tract area function. The approximation error for modeling the vocal tract goes to 0. How do we use the transfer functions? By means of researching on the transmission character of each acoustic tube, we can get the transfer function of the whole vocal tract. Speech production can be represented with different models in digital form. Based on the lossless tube model, we can describe the vocal tract transfer function with a series of reflection coefficients. Sound is generated in 3 ways: unvoiced, voiced, or mixed, each yielding a distinctive output. Vocal tract imposes resonance and anti-resonance structure so as to produce different speech sound. This leads to a terminal analog speech model, correct at the terminal points, but without mimicking the physics of speech production. Vocal tract transfer function can be described as a linear system VZ to process the time-varying input sequences. The figure shows a typical discrete time model of speech production. The linear discrete time system contains 3 parts: the glottal pulse model, the vocal tract model, and the radiation model. They are therefore essentially discrete time filters. Thus, we can get the transfer function Hz with 3 kinds of transfer functions Gz times Vz times Rz. In order to synthesize speech, the voice-unvoiced switch will switch to the source for the sound at that particular time. For the voiced generation, the impulse train is generated with pitch periods and then filtered with an exponential model of the glottis Gz. The vocal tract model Vz is usually a linear predictive model. It is so called because the current speech sample is generated from a number of past samples plus the current excitation. By analyzing the vocal tract model, we can get some vocal tract parameters, which also need to vary with time. In most cases, the radiation model Rz is ignored. Source filter is a way of conceptualizing the problem of speech production in frequency domain. From the view of spectrum, the output sound spectrum can be obtained by product of source and transfer functions plus a radiation effect. For voiced speech, the source function of the glottal pulses has the structure of harmonics. The source channel transfer function is vocal tract filter, which shows the character of resonance of acoustic tube. Assuming that glottal source has 12 dB attenuation per octave, the transfer function has some peaks at the positions of formats. According to the source filter theory, the result of source function times channel transfer function is a spectrum with harmonics and formats. Then the radiation effect of leaps boosts high-frequency components with about 6 dB increase per octave to get the spectrum of the final output. We have a diagrammatic summary of the source filter theory of speech production. The source filter theory states that vocal signals result from a 3-stages production, with the source, generally the glottal wave for voice speech, being subsequently filtered by the vocal tract function plus the radiation characteristic. That's all for this session. See you next session.